Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is Regional Managing Partner in the Northeast and is responsible for driving growth, quality, marketplace, and talent initiatives for 13 offices in 9 states for Vanderbilt University. He joined Deloitte in 1991 and became an audit partner in 2001. He also currently serves as the lead client service partner for one of the world's leading investment and advisory firms and is a member of the Deloitte U.S. Merger and Acquisition Services Leaders Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Henry Phillips.
Hey, what's up, man?
That's not you, is it?
No, it's not. Was there a mix-up?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is an actor, writer, musician, stand-up comic. He has also played hundreds of cities across the country and around the world. He has recorded 5 comedy albums, including On the Shoulders of Freaks, Number 2, Why Haven't I Heard From You, LA Dreams, and Neither Here Nor There. He's appeared in multiple episodes of Silicon Valley and as well as Season 2, Episode 4 of Drunk History. He's the co-writer of both Punching the Clown and Punching Henry, and is also a star of the comedy special, My First Comedy Special, and stars in the hit web series Henry's Kitchen. Please welcome Henry Phillips.
Wow. I just hearing all of those credits, all the things that I've done in my life is making me tired. Like I'm exhausted. I'm like, how did I do all that stuff? But yeah, the My First Comedy Special, and I don't know, because you talked very fast, so I don't remember, and my brain works very slow. But that's something that I helped my friend Gray produce. So I was, I guess I directed it and sort of produced it, but I'm not in it. I don't know.
Then okay, now though thanks for clarifying because okay, so now then clarify for me because I came and saw a comedy special.
Yes,
that
that's
you were
neither
in.
here nor there. Yeah,
good to know. Good to know.
And what I mean is I don't want to do a who's on first thing. That's the title of the thing. That's neither here nor there.
Okay, now some of our listeners may be going, well, this is Playwright Spotlight, and all we listed was a bunch of television shows and whatnot. But in my mind, there's another aspect of which I would consider another form of playwriting because you're writing for the stage, and that's stand-up. Mm-hmm. And that's what I kind of want to focus in on a little bit in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because it's one aspect that we haven't actually covered in Playwright
I should have
Spotlight.
done this before. I want to make sure this is, not that anybody calls me ever, but okay.
No, you turned the volume. Did you turn the volume?
I turned it up. Yeah.
Good.
You never know when, I'm an actor. I might get a call,
So how did you start? How did you get into to stand up?
Oh, okay.
And what was that journey?
Backdoor, I guess, kind of. Like I was a wannabe musician in high school. I had a really good friend, Eric Heinley, who was always a guy who chased his passion, what he wanted to do. And going right out of high school, we both kind of floundered in community college a little bit. He wound up getting really into the music scene as a drummer, and he's a really good drummer. And he was just doing everything, saying no to nothing and just going around to places. He'd answer, what was it back then? You'd have like the Recycler or whatever we had, BAM magazine. It'd be like, we need a drummer for our sketch group or whatever. And so, he was doing this thing out in Santa Monica. It was a sketch comedy troupe, and he was like playing an acoustic sort of bongo set or whatever while a guy was playing piano. And I got a call from him after we hadn't really been hanging out in a long time. I was at college at UCLA, and then he goes, remember there was that funny song you always used to do to crack us up? And I was like, oh yeah, because I had this silly, ridiculous song that I would do. And he's like, you should come out. I'm playing with these guys. I'll bet they would love it if you did your song for them. And I was just like, I don't understand what you mean. Like, just like you want me to perform comedy all of a sudden? And it was terrifying, and he's like, no, it'll be great. And I think because Eric was also a little bit of a crafty person when it came to like maybe what some would call manipulating or manufacturing a situation, because he told them, hey, this guy's a comedian, he's very funny, he's been doing this forever, which was complete bullshit. And so so I went out there and played my song for them. And it's funny looking back, because these guys I'm still good friends with them to this day, 30 years later or whatever. And they were all like, yeah, it's good. Yeah, why don't you come? Why don't you play Friday night? We could bill you as sort of like the Saturday Night Live has the musical guest. You could be the musical guest and do that song. And I was like, all right. Oh, man. For 3 days, I was terrified. I was like, I can't believe I'm going to stand on a stage in front of, and it was probably only 14 people. I mean, let's face it. This was 1993, a little theater called the Upfront Comedy Club on the Promenade. And I was terrified. But that first night came around. I think I had a couple of beers, for liquid courage. And they called my name, and just like I walked on there with the guitar and sang that song. And it just, the whole place erupted in laughter. And it was, I was like, okay, I'm addicted to that now. Like, I want to do it. And so then they said, yeah, that killed. Do it every night, every Friday night. And so I was going down there every Friday night. And I also had a song now in my back pocket for if I was ever out and about and somebody's like, hey, do a song. It's like having a card trick or something, it's like, so there was an open mic night going on at the Cinegrill, and I was there hanging out at the bar. By the way, hanging out at bars is the best way for stuff to happen. Like, you just have to do it, even if you don't drink, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, we're talking, I was probably 23 years old at this point. I was at the Cinegrill. I was sitting in the back, and it was a sort of open mic night, but like invited open mic night type thing. And all of a sudden, the guy on stage, Mark Nadler, who's an amazing genius, piano bar guy, and he just goes, does anybody feel like doing something, a song, which is really unusual. He was just sort of like, let's do whatever. And the bartender there said, because we had been talking, she goes, he says he does music, and no, whatever. But I tell you, I went up, and this time I was on the piano, but it was only a 3-chord song, so I knew how to do it in both ways, and I did the same song, but now I had done it a couple of times, and I'll be damned if it didn't kill again. And the first recording I have is at the Cinegrill of me performing. It's on YouTube, doing a song called "The First Time I Saw You," and you can feel it in the audience, just so nobody thinks I'm lying. But it was I was onto something. I was like, this is cool. And so I started doing Highland Grounds had an open mic night. There was the Coconut Teaser downstairs. They had a little place called the Crooked Bar where they had open mic night. And then I fell into a scene with a bunch, like 6 or 7 other people. And I was like, wow, I have friends now. I never had friends, like not in my adult years. I had them in high school, but I had a whole little circle of people, and we'd show up, and be like, hey, what's going on, Steve? Hey, you going to go up and you doing a new song? And it really was fun to go out, and, but there was music and there was comedy, and I could do both because I was doing a song. So I could go up and do a music open mic night or a comedy open mic night. It didn't really matter for me. So I was able to work twice as much and I was doing open mic nights, but I started working in new songs. Oh, I wonder if I can do anything with this melody. Oh, this would be a fun idea. And then I came up with enough eventually to do like a full hour. So I had an hour of stuff. I was at the Gengis Cohen on Fairfax, which right now is still there. I don't know how long it's going to still be there, but that place is a treasure. And by that time I had a little buzz going, and people were showing up. Maybe 30 people would come and see me because they saw me at the open mic nights, and I'd get like maybe, I think it was $7 at the door, and I'd get 4 of it, which is the fairest they were being. And so I think it was like $120 in 1994 money or whatever. And those were exciting times. Bud Friedman came to one of the shows because somebody brought him and said, hey, there's this guy who does comedy music or whatever. And then I met him afterward, and he says, well, why don't you come down to the Improv, start doing stuff there? And I was like, all right. And then that's the answer to your question. So then when I was at the Improv, I was basically a comedian. I was a musical comedian, but I was doing stand-up venues. And then it was a matter of time before comics would bring me out as their opening act on the road. So Doug Stanhope, for example, one of my earliest friends there, a guy named Drew Hastings, they would bring me out and they would do like, the Acme Comedy Club in Minneapolis for a week or Houston Laugh Stop and San Francisco Punchline, Sacramento Punchline I did at one point with Stanhope. And then I'd be making like $500 for a week and do like 4 of those in a month. And then I was actually making a living doing it. And so it's sort of the back door, I didn't say to myself, I want to be a comedian. As a matter of fact, I would have thought you were crazy if you said that would be a good idea for me. But it just sort of happened. I think it came, looking back, I think it comes from leaning in. When you feel that there's heat going on with something, just sort of lean into it. I just finished my degree, so I was ready to I was looking at journalism schools. I was thinking, maybe I can go, get a job. Maybe I'll go to law school. I don't know. The future was wide open, but the comedy thing was sort of happening and I was having fun. So I was like, maybe I'll just do that for a little while. So by the time I met you, for example, we were talking about it was 2001. I guess I was probably about 8 years in at that point.
Right.
And there was a guy named Jory who was an early fan. Oh, that's another thing. I started getting airplay on the Dr. Demento show.
Oh, okay.
Which was huge too. And Jory was a huge fan of the Dr. Demento show, and he set up my website at the time. And then through that's how I got on Third Degree, and that's where I met you.
Second Degree, sorry. What the hell's... Oh, yeah, no, you know what? Years later, I did something called the Third Degree, and so my old brain now is mixing them up.
I
won't give you the Third Degree for that.
Yeah. But, so...
I remember you had given us, it was the first day that you showed up to set, you'd given us all copies of your CD.
That sounds like me. I probably...
autographed, by the way. But it's great.
Oh, that was probably my second one at that time.
Because it was The Shoulders of Freaks.
Oh, Shoulder of Freaks. Yeah, so that was in 96. And then the next one I think was 98 or something like that.
And number 2, a very clever title.
And we were trying to figure out the day just so that we can do this, because it gets interesting. So you're saying it was post 9/11 that you and I did the independent film.
You and I, we had auditioned and then we did the table read. And I know it was October because shortly after it was like, oh, let's have because this is a close-knit group of friends that are supposed to have known each other since high school and things like that. And so none of us knew each other. And so what it was like, okay, well, it's October, I'll host a Halloween party. And that's how I know it was post 9/11. We know it was 2001, but I remember Randall and Scott talking about having gotten the equipment for the shoot for like pennies on the dollar, like because no production was going on. And so here we have this feature film, and Panasonic or whatever the company was, like almost gave it to us for free.
Yeah, wow. Randall pulled some strings and had some great production value on that. So, but you're sure it's not 2000?
Positive.
Okay, yeah. Because I moved in with a young lady, didn't work out, and we're still good friends. But that was, I guess, in 2001, and I remember 9/11 being right about the time that it ended. But also
your relationship caused 9/11.
Yeah, exactly. My relationship was a 9/11 in a weird way. But anyway, it must have gone on for a few months because I know that I had a partner during the time that we were shooting. And but the reason it's so surprising to me, and I don't want to go off on this, but I look at 9/11 like as, at least for a week, it was so dour and there was just a cloud over everybody. You didn't go out and party. Nobody laughed. It was just so dark that it's hard to believe that we kind of snapped back because there was a lot of joy on that film set and we weren't even thinking about 9/11.
Well, I'll tell you how bad it was talking about partying. Yeah. I worked at a sushi bar, Tokyo Delves.
Oh, I remember that place.
Yeah. And we still worked. We still had to come in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
On 9/11?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
my goodness.
Starbucks, right down the street, they closed, and we're like waiting for the,
Yeah.
for the go ahead to, but
And for people that don't know, you have to be in a good mood. I mean, it's sort of the adult version of Chuck E. Cheese at that place.
It is.
you know?
That's exactly what I called it. I call it the Chuck E. Cheese of sushi.
Yeah, yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, Tokyo Dubs was just a party place of sushi, and then they do sake bombs, and people get up on the chairs, they dance, there were games and a show and stuff like that. So except there was no animatronics.
Yeah. But it's not a place that you want to go on 9/11. Like, this is not,
The funny thing is funny for 9/11. The funny thing is that people still showed up for the reservations.
Oh,
we
wow.
some people didn't, but some people did, and I think it was an outlet, and I think that there's a testament to comedy during those dire times and those dark times that you kind of need it.
Yeah. It's amazing also that the more years go by, everything kind of melds together. I remember, because I had kind of two different worlds going on at the same time, because there was Second Degree, and then there was also the comedy thing. The first comedian I saw, it was about 5 days after, because everybody felt weird doing comedy. Like the late night shows all stopped and everything. But it was Nick Swartzen who gets up there and just had a very innocent, funny joke. It wasn't dark. It was just about how like, nobody was even broaching the subject. People were just trying to figure out how do we do comedy in a post 9/11 world. And Nick was the first guy that I saw that actually did bring it up. And it was really funny. He was talking about, right before everything happened on 9/10, I got my teeth bleached, and it's supposed to be, much whiter, and it's just kind of a cool thing. And I've been trying to work in smiling, but everybody's so down all the time, and it's kind of tough. People are in a conversation. People are like, "Yeah, no, my wife's, sister or whatever was, in the area where the whole thing happened," and I'm just like, "Yeah, this is." There's no way you can show your. I probably did a terrible version of the joke, but it was just hilarious to be trying to flash your pearly whites while everybody's talking about this dark stuff.
Oh, there's truth in comedy, though.
Yeah.
So before we get into how open mics work, because I do want to get into that, but I also want to talk about how the writing process works in that regard, and because you don't just do musical comedy.
Well, now I do stand-up comedy also.
Right.
I didn't back in the early days.
But even transitionally, you didn't have like any little snippets that were...
Oh, yeah.
So how did that writing go in while you were working up? Because you started with one song, and obviously for an open mic, you're doing maybe 5 minutes, and I don't think your songs are 5 minutes long. So let's say you have 2 or 3 songs, and they don't add up to 5 minutes, or maybe you're doing a 10-minute. So how are you writing... How does the writing aspect of stand-up work?
Okay, and there's so many stand-ups that give you different answers. I always tried to keep it sort of like an organic conversation type thing. In the beginning, I was sort of portraying the character of a bad folk singer when I was doing these open mic nights, and I would try to sucker people into thinking, oh, this guy's real. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, are we being put on? And so when I was doing my jokes, they would sort of be in character like that. Like I would watch a lot of these open mic nights, and you'd see somebody do something that made you laugh unintentionally, like you'd sort of take a mental note. I remember seeing one guy go, yeah, this next song I wrote, do you ever get the voices in your head? You know what I mean? You get those kind of voices. There's like that really high voice that's like, help me or something late at night. And everybody's like, no, dude, we don't get that. So that just killed me. I was just like, oh man, I should do something like that. So it starts with seeing something funny, or anytime you're hanging out with your friends and somebody's laughing at something that you're saying, that's fair game. Like that should go into the act somehow. And then it's a matter of trying to present it. Well, how can we get that to work? And then, I had, and sometimes it's a real conversation that happens between you and a friend. Probably my favorite was I had this manager, who came to me and she goes, okay, we got to come up with like sort of a, I don't know, like a catchphrase for you or whatever. And I was thinking James Taylor on Smack. And I don't think she knew this, but I was like, well, you know, James Taylor actually was on Smack, like famously. Like he was very famous for being on Smack. He had a big problem with it. So it's just like saying James Taylor. And she didn't quite understand what I meant. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't know. So what? And I was like, well, you just can't. That's like saying, you know, I don't know, Ike Turner if he was a wife beater or something. You know, it's like you just say Ike Turner. Yeah, it doesn't. So that was a real conversation that suddenly was like, oh, well, that's pretty funny. I have to go on stage and talk about that. So it starts with something funny happening in real life. Now, some of my friends will go to a coffee house and they'll literally write it out verbatim. So that way it takes the, what's the word I'm looking for? That just lessens the possibility of screwing it up.
Sure.
If you've memorized a line, then you can stand there and recite it, and that way you know it. But then you want to back off from that and make it sound conversational, because stand-up comedy is not stiff like a speech. You don't want to be a speech. You want to be like, come on, guys, we're all just hanging out, we're talking, whatever. So, but even with that, you can write down exactly what you're saying and say it verbatim, and I have friends that do that. For me, what always worked is trying to pretend like I was telling it to a new person every, you know, you've probably got your favorite story or multiple favorite stories, and every time you tell a new person, it comes out just a little bit different. This time you found, oh, okay, if I take out that part of it, it's still a funny story and it actually gets to the punch quicker, you know? I mean, that's all you're doing. It's really not that much different from what we all kind of do in regular conversation. I think probably everybody has had that experience of trying to tell their favorite story, whether it's a funny story or not or whatever. The more you do it, the tighter it gets. And then somebody else hears the story and passes it on, and then it changes, you know. But that's kind of the process.
But what's the? I mean, how do you write the setup and then the joke?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, there's some comics, you know, Mitch Hedberg or Stephen Wright, that kind of model where it's all jokes. It's set up punch, and they're genius. And Phillips is probably one of the all-time greats at it. I think their brain is sort of set to thinking that way. You know, it's just everything. Sometimes you just sort of look around and everything kind of strikes you funny, and then it's. But they're not all gems, you know. For every one of those that makes it into the act, there's probably 30 of them that got thrown away. But I don't know. I mean, so I had one that was kind of a one-liner where it was like, and this, again, it came from a real conversation, but I was watching a documentary on hallucinogenic drugs, and then the person I was talking to was like, you were on the drugs, or you were just... No, that's what the documentary was about or whatever. So I was like, that's funny. And so then it translates into joke form when I'm on stage. I just say, so the other day I was watching a documentary on hallucinogenic drugs, which I think is the best way to watch a documentary. So that's, you know, I sort of just tweaked it so that it became a setup and a punchline. And that's probably a little bit of a skill similar to learning a musical instrument or something like that. You just sort of do it enough times, you start getting better at coming up with the right wording.
How do you know when you've got it?
When you've got the joke, well, it's got to work consistently every single time, you know.
Do you, if it bombs the first time, do you scrap it? Do you give it another shot?
You have to, you have to keep going, because you'd never know. It could be the way that you told it, or it could be that this just wasn't an audience that's with you. You know, if you put, I mean, Mitch Hedberg famously had a lot of really, really rough sets in the beginning, and he was doing the same material that now generations are looking at and going, wow, this is some of the best comedy ever. You know, so you can't throw it away. But you can tweak the wording of it. I had one that I was A lot of these also, when Twitter came out, it was a great time to do it because you'd write it out and then, you could see in real time whether people were laughing at it or, putting their little like on there or whatever. But like one example of that is I wrote a joke where it was something like, I guess in my neighborhood, hailing a taxi must look exactly the same as trying to get a male prostitute, because I was standing out there for like an hour trying to get one and all these damn taxis kept pulling up, so I put that on Twitter, and so everybody's reading it. You're not hearing the verbiage of it, and it was working because people were all in the in that
comment
platform.
Section.
They're used to reading a joke, and then it's like, okay. When I tried to do it on the stage, I had a lot of difficulty with it. For some reason, I don't know if it was just a word that was missing or whatever. I had a lot of delayed reactions and people going, well, wait, I don't understand. Oh, I kind of get it. I guess he's saying that he's waiting for but it wasn't killing, and I don't even really do that one. I don't perform as much as I used to. This summer this spring I will be doing a bunch. But I don't really do that one that often. I should bring it back, though, because it could be that I tried it 3 or 4 times, didn't work, and then I just sort of scrapped it because I was like, well, it's not working. But that's not the right thing to do. I think you can go back and tweak it a little bit. I don't know. I'm curious to see if anybody watching me do it right there thought it was funny. I don't know.
I thought it was funny. I hadn't heard that one before.
Yeah, so, but yeah, that...
Well, that's where I was going to go with it. I was going to ask you, outside of that, I mean, have you ever gone back, since you've been doing it for so long, have you ever gone back and dusted off bombs to give them a try now?
Yeah, I have done that. I've done that with songs for sure, because sometimes all you need is to update the lyrics.
I thought it was all you need is love.
Well, yeah, that's right. And they were masters at the songwriting thing, which nobody knows. No. But okay, so... in the early years of me traveling, I was the opening act, and I'm at the comedy clubs, and it's mostly people in about the 30 to 50 year range, and they're out for their Friday night, and they're going to drink, and so they're drinking. And we all know that when you're drinking, you're just sort of, you're starting to go for more of the low-hanging fruit, you don't want to think too much. At least that's my thing. But so I found that my act started getting a little punchier, and I had to do words that hit a little bit harder, and I had to do it a little faster because I wanted to work there again. And there's a club owner in the back standing there going, is this guy funny or is he not? So, and that club owner might just come in for 10 minutes and then leave. And if he comes in for 10 minutes and you're trying to do this kind of weird bit that has a 5-minute long setup that may or may not work, unless your name's Jerry Seinfeld or something like that, they're going to be like, well, let's not have that guy again. So I threw away a lot of stuff back then. So if I was doing something that was more along the lines of, say, some of my favorite musical acts like Flight of the Conchords, Tenacious D or whatever, I love that stuff. That stuff I could never pull off because it was not really designed to get just massive laughs. It was more like you take the whole thing in, and it's hilariously funny, but to certain audiences and certain places, and I was having a tough time on a late Friday night keeping people's attention with anything that was nuanced or, a little bit quieter or whatever. So what happened is, I threw away a lot of stuff. But now, most of the shows that I'm doing, there's a critical mass of people in the audience that are there because of me. At this point, they're like either they heard me on the radio or they've seen one of the independent films or they're fans of the YouTube stuff or whatever. So I can get away with it a little bit more. So it is time to dust off some of that other stuff that I threw away and say, I think this was a good bit, I think that male prostitute one is probably a good example. But a lot of times people will just sort of hear one word and then sort of check out. I have another one. This was another one that I did that was having a hard time. This one's on the dirtier side, but it was, I was doing an interview and the guy asked me, what are my 2 favorite things? And I was like, cooking and masturbating. And I don't know what the second thing would be, you know? So now I love that joke, and it works great at a comedy club, like on a late Friday night. But there's some people that are just like, once they've heard masturbating, they're like, oh, okay, come on, next, you know? Like, they're just like, not everybody's into that. So you have to be careful, you know? But
isn't it about also shocking the audience?
For me, in my younger days, it definitely was.
And I don't mean in a graphic
surprising them.
Yeah,
absolutely. But there's a line, you know. If you just did that without the funny part, and some people do, where it's just you standing there and saying, and there's some jokes like that, you know, like the Aristocrats thing, where it's like the whole joke is how graphic can you get it, and there's some humor in just that, but
yeah, and that's my semantic aspect. Surprising is a much better word that I should have used rather than shocking, because I'm not talking about graphic or being obscene by any means. It's just like going in one direction, then coming back, and like
well, my favorite always was Deep Thoughts. I don't know if you remember Deep Thoughts.
Yeah.
And everything about that was great. As a matter of fact, I've modeled probably everything that I've done in comedy is a little bit of Deep Thoughts, because the presentation was like, okay, we've been watching comedy, but now it's time for us to you know, take a departure from that. We've got this pretty music and this like very sincere presentation. And then the jokes are basically just classic one-liners, just perfect, you know. Whenever I see an old lady fall on the street, I think to myself, wow, what if I was an ant and then she fell on me? Then I wouldn't think it's so funny, you know? And I think I might have messed up some of the wording there. But anyway, he's basically doing old school, hilarious one-liners, but the presentation of it is like you said, it's surprising. We're not expecting that. And I think that's what hits so hard with that. Spinal Tap is another thing, you know, the way, and all of those Christopher Guest movies, they're treated like we're going to be a fly on the wall and just see what happens the way all these documentaries do. And then all of a sudden you're just laughing your ass off because there's actual just slapstick comedy happening, but it's being treated like in a surprising way.
All right. I want to go back a little bit because we were talking about transitioning into songs and adding a little stand-up to that. How do you transition to the next line? I mean, obviously there's got to be some correlation between, all right, I just delivered this,
to go into the song,
or even the next joke.
The next joke, yeah.
Even because I'm sure if you're doing one-liners, there's got to be some kind of. That's
a tough thing, and I remember seeing George Carlin in Vegas in like '94. Oh man, my buddies and I just laughed so hard, and I'm sure you know, yeah. But it's like I was just like, the easiest way I can describe it is like vomiting laughter. I was laughing so hard, but he kept doing this one thing where he's just like, what do comedians do when they want to go from the one thing? I'm just gonna say change of subject. That's what we're gonna do, change of subject. And then he would just do a joke, and he's like, do you ever look at a fence and it just goes like, wanga? What the hell is that? Anyway, change of subject. You know, so he took the approach in that particular instance. I'm just gonna talk about the elephant in the room and say something, go from one thing to the next, and just tell you that I'm changing the subject, which is hilarious and it's in character. When you do it poorly, people know, and it's you have to acknowledge it. You know, it's like yeah. So my dog, blah blah blah. Anyway, speaking of dogs, cats, there's the musical Cats going on, and then suddenly they go, it's like, wow, nice segue there. I saw one guy one time do a joke about the musical Cats. And it was very clear, because he was an old guy like myself. It was very clear that he had a joke about it back when everybody was talking about it, maybe in the early 90s or late 80s or whatever. And, he just said something like, so I noticed that they're bringing Cats back, you know, it's going on at the Civic Center here. And of course, I checked, later on in my hotel room. I'm like, they're not bringing cats back. What is he saying? It just makes a complete lie because he wants to bring back his cats joke or whatever, But so yeah, those segues are always challenging. A guy like Mitch Hedberg didn't have to worry about it because he was presented as sort of like a rapid fire. You do the joke and then you stop and then you do the next joke. There wasn't any segue. But I guess the question would be, go back to a conversation. If you're on a date or something and you're talking to somebody, how do you segue one thing into the next that way? It's got to sound organic. Let's say you really, really want to work in that you work out when you're on your date. It's going to be tough to pull that out there. And it's like, oh, you live over there. Okay. Yeah. Cause my gym's right across the street. You're going to figure out some organic way to do it. You don't want to just be like, speaking of working out, I actually work out a couple of times a day, So yeah, it's challenging, but I would say if it sounds weird in a conversation, it'll sound weird on stage too. So keep it as organic as possible.
You mentioned being a character or earlier. Yeah. What's the difference between character and voice?
Well, I was
stand-up
never,
world.
Yeah. Okay. My dad was a character actor. He was very good. He was in off-Broadway. He did Broadway once, but he was mostly in off-Broadway. He was in Buried Child, the Sam Shepard play, and in the big production they did in New York. And he was a guy who would walk on, say his line, and kill, and then just walk off, and that was it. But he was a huge character. But he was a very shy person in real life. But that was the only way he could do it, is if he was in character. For him to go on there and just be like, yeah, this is me, whatever. He was not good at it. We talked about it a lot. And I know friends of mine that every time they go out on stage, they're a huge character, and then off stage, they're not. That's a little different from, I think when I say I'm in character, maybe character is a percentage, and I'm like 18% in character, but now I got to do math. 82% me. I should have picked a round number. Come on. But anyway, so yeah, I think if you watch a stand-up like Patton Oswalt, I think that you're mostly getting what Patton Oswalt would be like to have dinner. I've had dinner with him too, and there's not a lot of difference between. And that was a really big style, in the '90s. There's people like Paul F. Tompkins is another one of my all-time favorites. But these are guys that are just talking about their day or their observations. And
well, that's my question. I mean, if you're going back and you're looking at the '90s or even the '80s, but if you take somebody like Emo Phillips, who's a character, and you take Bobcat, do you think that their comedy would have worked if they would have played it on their own?
It's a good question. Emo Phillips's jokes are so good that a lot of them.
I used to couldn't stand him back in the day, and then it wasn't until I finally really started watching
because
it.
of the character.
Okay,
was the character turning you off?
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of his jokes were stolen and put on the internet, and there'd be like 20 jokes to brighten up your day, and there'd be a bunch of Emo Phillips jokes. But he was, he is still just like the best. He's incredibly good. And when you watch his show, the character, I think from the people that I've talked to, it seems to be, in many cases, it's why we know who he is. Right. But for some people, it's a liability because in the 90s, it became so much about I just want to see a guy talking, and if you feel like somebody's doing a character. So the Bobcat Goldthwait, so I think he stopped doing that character. Every time I've seen him live, it's incredible storytelling of his, and it's incredibly funny. But yeah, maybe it was more of a sign of the times. Maybe in the 80s, there was a lot, obviously, Judy Tenuta was a character,
Well, Sam Kinison.
Sam Kinison was a character too, yeah. And George Carlin wasn't really, or he might have been just a little bit more animated version of what a person is in real life. But, it comes down to preference too. Some people are like, oh, I love that guy. Who's the guy who comes out and does the, and like, I'm trying to think about who's out there right now. I'm terrible at coming up with examples for stuff, but I'm sure there's people that are a flat out character right now.
Sure.
That are going out doing that. Well, Larry the Cable Guy is a great example.
Right.
But see, now even that, there's a real person in there that we can all see. He's not being completely crazy. Like, he's sort of talking at the way a real person, it's more authentic. So maybe it's not the same. Maybe characters tend to get toned down in stand-up comedy eventually because people crave
authenticity.
Yeah. Which is different from sketch comedy. I mean, sketch comedy's almost all characters,
sure,
Yeah. Because I think part of that is because they don't, a sketch lasts like 5 minutes or whatever. So it's like, okay, that was fun. Let's move on to the next thing. But to sustain it for an hour and a half, that's why some of those SNL movies worked better than others, because,
how long should a good joke be? Is there a length where it's just like, okay, it's,
I don't think there's a pat answer for that. I think it depends on your act and what your goals are. But, so, a guy we haven't talked about, Doug Stanhope, the guy who brought me out, as his opening act for years. I've watched him more than I've watched anybody. And he, I even asked him one time, I was just like, does that bother you because he had a couple of one-liners and every now and then those would get stolen by somebody. And he's always been like, if there's a joke that I said that's so easy for somebody else to do it and get a laugh, it's not something that I look at as a cornerstone of my act,
Right.
They can't just take 15 minutes of my opinion about society or about a particular subject unless they're stealing the entire 15 minutes word to word, but that doesn't really happen, So he's got a different approach to it. It's not really a joke that lasts a certain amount of time. It's more of a rant or a thought process, but there's jokes within it. Emo Phillips, one of his most famous jokes is a very long joke about when he meets another Christian, and I don't even want to try to do justice to it, but people can look it up. It's a lot of people say it's one of the best jokes ever written, and but yeah, it's a very long joke. But then there's super one-liners. When you look at like vaudeville and stuff, take my wife, please. That's probably the quickest joke you can come up with, So it depends on your act, I guess. I mean, Stephen Wright, there's a rhythm to it,
Right.
I guess.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I'm trying to compare it to like music, but music and pop music, there's a certain length of a song, 3 minutes or 4 minutes or whatever.
Sure.
But I guess when you get into the album, it can vary a lot more, and there's bands like Led Zeppelin and Queen that have like 8-minute songs or whatever, and so I think comedy is kind of like that. If people are laughing, and by the way, I just wanted to let everybody know I'm just talking out of my ass, so don't think that I'm an expert. I don't want anybody to think, well, who made this guy the expert? I'm just saying what I've witnessed to the best of my ability. But, okay, so Woody Allen, you can go back and listen to his old stand-up. And what I loved about it was it would be like a really long story. The rabbi story is amazing, and there's so many good ones. But the moose story, I guess, is one. Well, no, that's a different one. But he would have a long story, and then he would insert these little one-liners in them, So he would be telling a long story about a relationship or whatever that he was in that didn't go well. But, and not only are people loving that story, but he was smart enough to know that he's also in a comedy venue. So he's throwing in a little, I was a victim of oral contraception one time. I asked a girl to sleep with me and she said no. And that's it. So he just like sticks that right in there while he's telling the story. So it's sort of like gives people a little something to grab onto while we're getting there. And that's a really smart thing to do, because you are at a comedy club after all. I think the biggest rule is if the show is billed as a comedy show, if the club is a comedy club, or if it's comedy night at the venue, or if you list yourself as a stand-up comedian or whatever, it's got to make people laugh. People have to be laughing. Otherwise, you're doing not doing something bad, but you're doing spoken word or something else. And within that, it doesn't matter how long it takes. You don't want to talk for 20 minutes and then have them all laugh at the end, because that's not really what you're there for. So I would say certainly every minute or two you should have several laughs in there. I'm
going to go back.
Yeah.
In your life, starting out, and you're starting to write stuff, and maybe you still have this. Maybe you still go through this. So you're writing. Do you present your new material to anybody, or do you do it in the mirror to see if it's funny before you present it on stage? Or did you, when you were first doing the open mic nights, you're like, well, it's open mic night, I think I've got some new material, I'm just going to try it out and see where it goes?
I've always said it to friends, any friend that will listen. I was much more social in my 20s, 30s, 40s, so I'd be going out all the time, and I'd tell them a story. Now that I'm 54, I'm just sort of like, I don't really go out as much, so it's harder to find people. I have to call people on the phone that are comics and say, hey, is this funny at all? But it's not as good as back in the day. My act took a real positive turning point when I started doing this one bit that was based on a true story. It was a girl that I was seeing at the time who, when we were having sex, she kept on saying, hey, it's like, I have no problem if at one point the girl wants to say, I really like it when you do this, or if you touch me there, or whatever. This girl would always be like, I really like it when people do this. And I'm like, can you not say people? Like, that's not the right word at all. Like, people. Like, I generally, when people are down here and they're doing, it's like, it makes it sound like you're at the DMV or something like that. And so I kind of went on with that. But that was one that I would tell every friend that would listen if we were out at a bar or at a comedy show or whatever. And they would laugh and they'd be like, oh, you got to do that. You absolutely got to do that. So that one, it was so solid. I didn't have to write it down. I just went up and said it the same way I had been saying it to my friends. And it just came out. And then I was doing that joke every time, opening up with it. And it always got everything started the right way. So
you're just kind of building throughout your day or throughout your week or life. You're not like sitting down, I'm going to write some jokes. I'm going to see what I can come up with.
My friend Greg Warren does that. Like he's a, I believe he goes to a coffee house and just designates a certain time aside and says, this is time to work, and I'm going to come up with a few jokes right here. And he'll sit. I have a hard time doing that because I feel like I have to be in life in order for something funny to happen. But in his case, he might write down things as they happen and then go there to just finish them out, Right. But yeah, I think you're always on the lookout for things that are funny, and you want to repeat them to your friends as much as possible. And then it gets solid there. Say them into your tape recorder, time out how long it takes to say it. But there's words in there that you have to hit. And the only way to know whether those are right or not is when you're talking to a friend and they're laughing or not, Did you ever take a joke that your friend said, nah, or did you ever have the joke where, oh, yeah, that's funny, when it really wasn't, 'cause especially with your friends, because you think you can trust them, but they might just be appeasing you. Oh, that's a great, you have to be able to see through that. I think you can tell, you can tell if your friends, yeah, if they didn't laugh, but they just went, "That's great. Oh, you got to do that." And it's like, well, you didn't laugh. You just told me it's great, But if they're laughing, it's hard to hide that. I remember one time, I think it was right about, it was probably about when we were doing our movie, and it was after that because it was right when my breakup happened, and I showed up to the Improv, which was sort of our home away from home. Basically, I was just a wreck, and as soon as I walked in there, one of the comics came up to me and goes, "Oh, Henry, hey, I got this new bit. I want to see if you think it works or not." And I'm just like, just wanting to cry, and I'm just stone-faced. And then he told me the whole joke, and I just didn't listen to it at all because I was just in such an emotional state. So I was literally like this, and then he's like, "Wow, man, I'm not doing that." And for all I know, he might have thrown away a really hilarious joke just based on that. And he's like, "Oh my God, apparently that one doesn't work." And I hope he tried it on some other people. But yeah, I just was not in the zone to be laughing at anything at that moment.
What's the next step after an open mic? When do you stop open? Well, I don't know. I shouldn't. That's not the right question. I'm not going to ask when do you stop open mic, because from what I understand, even the greats will still stop into open mics.
Yeah, they have to work out new material somehow. And
so when do you take the next step? I guess is what my question is. And what is that next step?
This part can sound harsh, unless you're a positive person and you think about it as, well, I'm just going to have to push myself. But I would say if you're doing open mic nights and people aren't coming up to you saying, "Hey, I think you're good. Can you do my show?" That's a booked show. It's not an open mic night. This is actually like people come out to see at the haha or whatever. Or an audience member at the open mic night, maybe just a couple that happens to be sitting at the bar, among the 14 people, comics watching. They should come up to you and say, "You were our favorite," or "I love what you did about this. Oh, my wife has an issue with you because you talked about blah, blah, blah." If you're not getting any kind of response at all when you're doing these things, then you gotta keep doing open mic nights, because that's how you get to the next level. Is somehow or another you have to be doing something that is their favorite, or it's making somebody say, I want to be a part of that. What's going on there? Maybe could do my show, or and I think that's probably the same with music also. Like if you have an open mic night when there's 40 people playing their music, there's going to be a couple of standouts, that are going to be, somebody's going to go up to them and say, "Hey, do you ever do private parties? Because I'll pay you if you go up and do that same thing you just did right there. I'll give you a couple $100 or whatever." So I think that needs to start happening at some point. And
does it always happen by invite? Or is there another step that you can take?
As opposed to if you just get a tape of yourself, for example, at the open mic night and send it to a comedy club and just say, "Hey, I'm a comedian. I've been doing it a few years. Here's a tape of me doing it." That's going to be tricky. Nobody asked you. They have plenty of people that they've seen at open mic nights that they want to go up to. There's just too many people doing it, and they're also getting referrals from comics that work there that say, "Hey, you got to book this guy." At some point, somebody else has to be the one that they're hearing it from. It can't be all you, I think. And that part's a little bit harsh, but it's true. Like, for example, there was a period of time in about 2007 that I wasn't getting any callbacks from clubs that I had been working at for many years, and that's how I was making my living. I remember Nashville was one of them, and it was very disappointing to me. And now I could be like the guys that I used to laugh at and call the club owner and say, "Hey, come on, man. Come on, put me back in the ring. I'll make them laugh this time. It's going to be great." They're not going to book you because they feel sorry for you. Maybe they will. I don't know. But either way, that's not making it in the business. If they're not calling you, you have to ask yourself what you can tweak to make them want to call you. Because that's the way it started for me. It was like, people would say, hey, you can come out and be my opening act. They wouldn't have said that if it was totally shitty. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they were bringing me out there because they thought, oh yeah, this guy will warm up the audience a little bit, then I'll go up there, and then when you're the opening act and then the club owner says, hey, let's have you come back and be the headliner next time, like it has to come from them. I don't think you can really muscle your way into the situation. I mean, it might get a short-term result, but eventually they have to be the one asking you.
Right. So there's so many questions I wanted to go with that, and then I lost them all. So the one thing that I want to get into the musical aspect as well, and you mentioned that there was another comic that was going back and using old stuff. I mean, do you have? This is where I was going with this originally, and I don't want to. This might come off as a backhanded compliment.
Oh, that's right.
But do you think the dry spell came from, hey, look, we're not booking this kind of gimmick anymore? And I don't want to say that what you're doing is a gimmick, but we're not doing the musical comedy anymore. We're looking for something like, we're not doing characters anymore. We're doing just straight up storytelling, and whatever the new trend in comedy is right now. Is there a possibility in that, or?
Well, I'll tell you what would be the real answer, and then what my opinion answer is.
Sure.
Okay, so because I really do have an opinion on that. I wasn't getting called back because it was stale. I wasn't writing new stuff. I was going back and doing the same stuff over and over again and partying with the waitresses afterward. I was just having a good time. And finally, they're just like, there's 50 other comedians on Comedy Central that we can have. And it got more competitive. And I wasn't bringing new stuff to the table. I was a fresh thing. So now, later in my life, I started doing fun stuff on the internet, and then I had the independent films and stuff like that. And then the phone started ringing, and people were like, "Oh, hey man, you're doing all this stuff, let's bring you in, So the Tonight Show is a good example. For years, my manager was trying to get me on the Tonight Show.
Sure.
And they were just like, look, it's a strict rule. We do not have guitar comedy. It's just a thing. I don't know. It's the way it's always been. And we just, we've never had it. Traditionally, we just never have it. And then all of a sudden I'm watching one time and Nick Thune's on there, who's a very funny guy, with his guitar. And then I'm just like, okay. It's not that you have a rule that it's like, sorry, it's the law. We can't break this law. If you're going in with a good product, they'll bend there's no law that you can't, so there's no rule. Like the comedy clubs like you were talking about, for example, hey, characters, dry, spoken rants, whatever it is, dirty, clean, whatever. If it puts butts in seats, we're going to put it at the club. That's generally the way they are. They're very rarely, because I'm friends with a lot of the club owners, there is a branding thing where they're just like, we kind of only do like the cool comics, we try not to, and that happens to some extent, or only comics that do this type of comedy or whatever, more blue collar type stuff, or maybe, it's like a more alternative type stuff or whatever. That's fine, but generally speaking, the club owners I've talked to are always willing to put up an act that's bringing in big numbers, and chances are, and if they are bringing in big numbers, then that's probably because in that market, like you go to San Francisco Punchline, for example, and you're from NorCal, so you probably know it's just like, that's where trends get started and then eventually go out to the rest of the world. So you'll see like Greg Proops, the scene out there in San Francisco was so many amazing comics came out of that scene. Jake Johansson's another one.
Jake Johansson.
Yeah. But they were, they weren't your run of the mill comics. They were cooler, and different, a little bit more something going on, something intelligent going on or whatever. And, so I think that if the region can also dictate, what kind of comics that they want to have there,
I on the note of San Francisco Punchline, it was a very historic opportunity, which kind of bummed I didn't get it finished, because we had gone to, because I lived in Sacramento, just for those of you that don't know, and we were at we decided to go to this San Francisco Punchline, and this is in 1994, 95, because the girl that I was dating at the time, and we took her little brother and his date, and we went to San Francisco Punchline, which is an 80-minute drive, and Dave Chappelle was playing.
Oh, yeah.
And this is early, and
what year would you say this is?
94, 95.
Sorry.
Started. That's okay. We started dating.
Remember that you said that.
We started dating in 94, so it was probably 95 that we started.
Okay.
That we went. But my girlfriend's little brother had his date had a curfew, and Dave was on a roll. He's like, I'm just going to sit up here and keep going until they kick me out. Mm-hmm. And we got to see probably a good hour and a half, 2 hours, and he was still going. I mean, it's like, we got to get home by midnight, and we got called out because we're like standing up, getting ready to walk out the door, and he's like, where are you guys going? I'm like, she got to get home. And I don't know how long that would have lasted. I don't know how long went that night, but it was really, really, I think about that moment. I'm like, God, missed out on probably an historic moment.
Well, you saw a lot of it, though. Yeah, I mean, but he's kind of known for doing that. I saw him do that at the San Francisco Punchline 10 years later, maybe even more. I think it was post the Chappelle show.
Oh, okay.
And I was actually working there opening for Jake Johansson, and then Chappelle was so big that they didn't bump Jake Johansson or anything like that. They just said, hey, if you want to do all these shows that start at midnight, at one show every night, and go till however long you want, we'll do that. And that's what they did. And it sold out in like 20 minutes. Every single seat was sold out. And I finished my show, watched Jake. I took in a lot of comedy that week. And then I would watch Chappelle. And what was amazing, boy, it was on Tuesday night, he had a notebook and he was sitting down and he was just like, all right. And his charisma is just like off the charts. It's incredible how charismatic he is. You want to laugh with him. And he's so funny, And so he would just be like, I don't know, is there anything here? And then he would just kind of throw out a couple of funny things that happened this week or whatever. And then some of them would get laughs, and some of them, everything would get a laugh, but some of them would be a huge laugh or whatever. And he's like, all right, maybe there's something there. And then I watched every night, and it just was more and more. It was the same premises that he kept going through. And then he was doing some improving and talking back and forth with people, and it was fun. There was one part where somebody's like, why did you give up $50 million? And he's like, because I got $10 million, bitch. It's not like you go to a restaurant and they're like, oh, you only got $10 million. We can't help you here. It's like, and so anyway, by the time Friday night came around, it was just like, the place is packed. It's the weekend crowd. Everything's, the house lights are up, and he comes out just standing up, and then doing all the stuff that on Tuesday night was just him sitting there reading it out of a thing. But now he's doing it as a full. I believe I watched him come up with a whole hour of stand-up comedy right there in that week, and it was unbelievable because he's doing the same stuff, but he was selling it way harder, and he knew where he was going with it, and he knew where the funny parts were. That was an incredible experience.
Well, you hear that about you hear that about some of the greats where they do come up with a notebook or something like that. And I admit when I did stand up the few times that I've done it, I have a notepad. Do you frown against that, or do you think it's acceptable if you're doing open mics, or do you think it should be polished and you should know exactly what you're doing?
I don't know. There was a big backlash there were a lot of older comics that used to look at Janine Garofalo and be like, back in my day, you memorized your act and you went out and did it. You didn't look at your notebook. Jeez. I mean, it'd be like an actor looking at their script while they're in the movie, It's like, but is it though? I mean, what she brought to the table was a very a symbolic thing that was going on in the country. It's sort of an alternative. You're saying it's bad to look at notes. Okay, then I'll look at notes even more. Then that's how this works. I'm the nirvana of. So it's like, again, I don't think there's any rules. I wouldn't do it because it's not my thing. I look at some people out there. I can't think of who does it. I think Mark Maron does it every now and then, but I don't know. But also I would see a lot of these people just working out new stuff, and that's totally legal. Of course you can, if you're working out. Right. Okay, what do we got here? But at a comedy show, that's your, when you're doing your actual act.
Sure.
I mean, again, no rules, but I think I tend to lean toward the people who are more old school show person. One of my favorite all-time comics to watch is Dana Gould. And what I think I like about him so much is that he has, or Martin Short's another one. They're incredibly intelligent, and they do intelligent comedy that you don't necessarily see coming and all that stuff. But every now and then they'll go into a voice or a dance or whatever. And then you go, oh, this person has old school performance chops. Like this person's done theater or they've done whatever, improv, And I love that because it's like when Dana Gould he did just a rock solid Vincent Price imitation that just sold his bit that much more, as opposed to just being like, I don't know, what do you guys think of this? It'd be kind of funny if Vincent Price was it, but no, Dana Gould was coming out and he was doing the voice perfectly, the facial expressions. So I love it when somebody really sells it, But I'm not against it if that's a comic's whole thing. Their whole persona is I'm the notebook person. There's nothing less dignified about that than, being any persona on stage,
How much is confidence and commitment a part of an act?
Confidence, both of those things are huge. I mean, huge. Here's the best analogy that I can come up with is everybody gets on the plane, the pilot goes on there and it's like, hey folks, how's it going? We're going to be in New York probably about 6 p.m. Weather looks good. Everybody sit back and chill. We're going to have a good time. And everybody's like, all right, this is good. Imagine if that pilot got on there and it's like, well, we had a little difficulty, but I think we got it solved. But anyway, I've done this before, so it's fine. Let's just buckle up and see where we go with this, People would be terrified. I think that's the way it is with a stand-up comic, And even if your persona is that you're the nervous guy, you kind of have to make sure that you're really owning that nervous guy to where the comedy's coming out, as opposed to really being actually nervous, because then people just are uncomfortable.
All right.
It's tough to watch somebody. Well, I mean, now we're crossing over into acting chops too. It's like when you're watching an actor in, especially in theater, if they're not very good, then they don't look like they're committing. They're not confident. They're afraid of what their friends from high school are going to say if they see that. You're like, you can't be thinking any of that stuff, And I've always struggled with that because I'm not a confident person. I've never been necessarily athletic. I'm just never a person who's comfortable in my own skin. And so I've chosen this weird thing, but I've tried to make it work for myself by having a character that's kind of a little off center anyway.
Right. Yeah. I see that in Henry's Kitchen. So if you're building an act, I mean, are you just grabbing things that you've been building over your I don't want to say career, because you haven't started a career yet, but you've done your 5-minute open mics. Maybe you've moved it up to a 10-minute open mic, right? Mm-hmm. And then now you've got to do a 15-minute. You're not the headliner. What is it before the host?
The feature act.
Yeah. So are you just slowly building it and just grabbing the best of your work and then presenting it, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a common thing that you'll hear a lot of comics say. Just because you have 50 or 55 minutes of jokes doesn't mean you can do 55 minutes and headline a comedy club.
Right.
now that you've got your 55 minutes of jokes, take out 30 minutes of that because it's not good enough, and keep the stuff that's gems, and then go out and get more stuff. And so I wish I knew that earlier, because I was headlining pretty early because the feature sets were going so well because it was fresh and I had this guitar and everything. But when the headlining thing came out, I didn't have that other 15 minutes beyond 30 that was killer. And that really hurt me because toward the end of the act, people started getting bored, you know?
Right.
So you really have to have 50 minutes of really, really good, great, tried and true comedy, or just be like a Dave Chappelle that's famous anyway, so everybody's sort of there to see him. And that's a whole different level. But in terms of being unknown, you have to go up there with material that's tried and true. You have to be confident and you have to commit.
And the feature stuff, but that's only coming, that's still an invitational aspect. That's somebody inviting you to come.
It's usually either the comic, the headliner bringing you along, or if you're a local, like, I'm going to go to Peoria, Illinois in early April. My friend Jeff Bailey lives out there. He's a very funny guy. He's going to be the feature act. He lives there, and that's what the club owner and I talked about. I requested him, and that's a good example. It's usually the headliner who brings you out. There's exceptions, of course.
Is that how the traveling aspect works when you're hey, I'm gonna not the bigger people, but I'm talking about like, I got invited to this town for this, or
yeah, and then the hope is, well, if I'm not mistaken, I think Kyle Kinane got his start from opening for Patton Oswalt, and Patton was such a hot commodity that everybody would go to the Patton Oswalt show, and then meanwhile it's like, wow, the opening guy's pretty damn funny too. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how he kind of really broke, because you've got these huge audiences. And one of the guys that is probably my favorite right now is Joe List. I don't know if you know Joe List. He's incredible. He's very funny, and but he spent a lot of time opening for Louis C.K., Nick DiPaolo. There were a lot of comics that he was the opening act for, so he was able to not only build up a lot of comedy chops with that, but also get a fan base.
What about representation? At what point can you? I mean, is that another one of those they got to come up to you kind of a thing? Or
that's probably a better way for it to happen. But I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who's new to LA, but he's been doing comedy for a while, and he has a good act, and we were talking about it, and I'm like, I'm not telling him like, hey, if you see a manager, dart across the room and just be like, hey, you got to come. I'm doing a show Saturday night. Please come to the show. Here's a flyer or whatever. That nobody's comfortable doing that. Some people are, but that doesn't really suit most people's personality. What I told him is like, if you're talking to a manager, somebody introduces you to somebody after a show or whatever, oh, this guy's a manager, just put it out there. Put yourself out there, what you do. It's like, yeah, I just moved out, got a show tomorrow night, so I'm excited about that. And then hope that person saw your act and says, oh yeah, well, I think I'm going to be around, so maybe I'll come in and watch, or whatever. I don't know. Just at least have some conversation openers. Don't close yourself off. But yeah, in terms of going up to somebody and saying, hey, I really think that you would be a good manager for me, I'll tell you that I don't think I've ever done that. It was always sort of a mutual thing.
What about, did you ever submit? Did you ever send your material into agents or managers and say,
no,
hey?
I mean, the manager should do that for the agent. So I think you should only focus on trying to get a manager.
When do you know you're ready for a manager?
Well, I would say the manager has to probably approach you, and that's what happened to me. And it gets awkward too, because you sort of outgrow the first manager, and then you want to move on to somebody else or whatever, something goes wrong or whatever. And meanwhile, you've built up this huge friendship, so it's tough. Mm-hmm. But A manager should be the one who does all the dirty work after that. Like they're the ones who get your agent and maybe fire your agent if another one comes around, or is the one who puts you on a showcase to go to the Montreal Comedy Festival or something like that, you know? But yeah, your first goal is to get a manager because they are friends with everybody and they're connected, you know?
I want to go into a total change of subject.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we haven't gotten, we've talked about writing a little bit, but we haven't talked about it from your specialty, which is the songwriting aspect. How do you write a comedy song? Mm-hmm. You know, how many, is it the same approach? Is there a setup? Is there a delivery? Is there a punchline? How many verses should there be? Is there a chorus? What does that look like? And as far as the
well, there's a very different approach to writing a song than there would be for a joke,
right?
Because pop songs are based on repetition. You know, you hear the chorus over and over again, and you walk away humming it and stuff like that. Well, you would never say the punchline to a joke 3 times, you know. It's like if you tell a joke, you're done. The punchline. Once the surprise happens, okay, it's time to move on to the next thing. So some of my songs did the verse, chorus, but generally I would do about 1.5 minutes of the song. And then once I got to the punchline, I would just sort of bail and say, go on to something else. Weird Al is not only, extremely talented. There's something that he does that I think is underrated. Like if you've ever tried to make a parody song, you have that problem where you have to come up with some place to go after everybody's heard the punchline. You know, once everybody goes, oh, it's eat it instead of beat it or whatever. Well, a lot of times I'd be tempted to be like, okay, well, that was the joke, you know, and I'm going to move. And a lot of times when you see people do those parodies, they'll just do the parody part, you know, and then get to that part and then they'll move on. But he doesn't do it that way because of the nature of the way his albums are structured and everything like that. He does a full parody of the full song, and it sounds just like the song. But I have heard that he's one of these guys that locks himself in a room and just focuses extremely sharply on writing songs, and you can tell because the last verse is always as funny as the first one, and that to me is incredible. If you go back and listen to his songs, like he'll throw in new lines as in the choruses that you've already heard. So that's the challenging part. For me, I also had songs that were just sort of a ramp up, you know, where it would just sort of, it wouldn't really do a chorus. It was just sort of like, I have a song called First Time I Saw You where it just starts, you know, we were on a date one time and then this happened. And then I got so nervous, I fell down and started writhing on the floor, and your dog came over and started licking me. You know, it's just like there's no repeating chorus. It just kind of gets more and more weird every time, you know. But
well, that's how Pretty Little Something of Mine. What's
Sweet Little Blossom of Mine.
Yeah.
So that song was a real song that was written by my friend Joe Kelly Jr. That was just he would do the "You Are the Blossom, I Am the Vine, Sweet Little Blossom of Mine." And so I was like, Joe, you got to let me turn that into a comedy song. You are the blossom, you know, you are the sun, I am the moon, pulling me from your gravitational pull, whatever, you know, I don't know. But, and so Joe and I share credit on that song. He's the one who came up with the song, the structure, which I think is, but he wrote it sincerely as a real song. So I think that's part of going back to why it works, is because it's packaged in a serious way, a serious love song type thing, you know.
Well, the other one was, there was the other one with there was a girl, and then it ends with the police coming after you or something.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
The one I was talking about. The First Time I Saw You. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one doesn't really have a chorus. It just sort of like, that one came from, I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who was working at the time on something on the computer. This was like in the 90s. And I was saying something like that. I could tell he was working on he was working on something that was distracting him from the conversation. So he wasn't listening to me. You know, you could just tell when somebody's not listening. So I was just like, yeah, I was talking to this girl and I was just like, got so nervous because she was so hot. And my friend's like, yeah. And I shat my pants. You know, I just basically just shat my pants right there. And my friend's like, yeah, no. And I was just like, oh, I wonder how far I can go with it. Yeah, eventually we cleaned it all up, but then I just kind of like decided I'd lean into it, and I just got a gun and said, hey, everybody, nobody leaves. And then the cops came. But, you know, just trying to make it as ridiculous as possible until my friend finally is like, hold on, what the hell are you talking about? And that song is sort of a version of that, you know.
Does everything have comedic potential?
I think so. I think that like things like cancer and stuff like that, you know, I mean, obviously they're very dark things, but if the right person can make you laugh at something that you're scared of, then that is a way to do it. Again, I told you about how I had never heard a comedian make a joke about 9/11 in that first week after it. And the first one that I saw was Nick Swartzen, and the room just erupted with laughter, partly because we were just so afraid of this. We didn't know what was going to happen for the next couple of years or whatever. It was just like, are we going to be the ones that are next or whatever? And just to hear somebody make a joke about the subject that made us all laugh, it was just like it felt so good, you know? I don't think you want to punch down. I'm not a guy who likes to, I've never, I hope this is true, but generally speaking, I don't think I've ever made fun of people's appearances, you know, their race or their, you know, whether they're heavy set or not or whatever. I just, like, to me, that those people are in the audience. I don't want to, you know, have them not be feeling included in the show. We're all having a good time here. Some people do, and it works for them, but it's usually a very specific type of persona that does that well.
Well, I think you can go to this self-deprecating comics, like Brian Regan.
Oh yeah.
You know, who's brilliant at that. You know,
he's so great. Well, he's the dumb. I remember you and I bonded on talking about him even back then, like 20 some years ago.
And he's clean,
and he's
as well.
Still extremely funny. Yeah. Well, yeah. What he does is he I just watched a clip of his the other day, and he was talking about how every supermarket is trying to get you to sign up for the rewards thing, and it's like, what's the way that we do it where I just give you the money and you give me the thing and I get to watch my children grow up? You know, I don't want to sit and do paperwork with you right now. And it was so funny. And I try to analyze. I'm like, why is this so funny to me? And I think it's because it really is a shitty part of our society that everybody, everywhere you go, has got their way to be able to collect data on how you're shopping and all this other stuff. It just gets really annoying. And to see somebody make fun of it, it makes us feel like, oh, cool, I'm not alone in this. And
do you think that becomes because it's relatable?
Yeah.
But then, and again, I think this is the second time it's come up. There's a lot of back-to-backs between this episode and the last episode that's come up. So now I'm going to bring up Dane Cook, who was bashed a little bit because he was not telling jokes, but he was telling stories that were so relatable that are funny, because I've gone through that. But isn't that kind of what comedy should be about, especially if you want to be inclusive, because we've all, for the most part, gone through some of those things.
Yeah, well, I remember Dane Cook being there. I don't remember liking him or disliking him. There were not a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends weren't like, "Hey, let's go to the Dane Cook show," or "Have you heard this new bit about Dane Cook?" Oh, or this new bit that Dane Cook. Right. Whereas with Louis C.K., everybody was saying that. It's like, "Oh, you haven't seen Louis? You gotta go see Louis." And I bring him up because he was the other big guy at the time, you know. And I wonder if maybe Dane Cook just got so big so fast that it was just sort of like. Right. He had every bit as the same backlash. I mean, it's sort of you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I don't really know much about what the backlash was. I just don't know that I necessarily responded to that. Now, I don't know if he had self-deprecation. Did he?
No. He just told relatable jokes.
Yeah,
and that's where, when you were talking about the whole thing with Brian Regan about not knowing why something was so funny. And I think the whole thing with that aspect is because we've all been there. We've gone through it.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to talk about the downfall or anything like that. Of Dane Cook. I just know that was his shtick. That was his.
I think it's like a band, like Nickelback. Once you get so big, you're going to be a target for all that stuff. And there's no way to avoid it. So I'm very happy that I've always been obscure and one of those names that you would only know if you were a genius at remembering obscure names. Yeah.
That's why we get That's why we got the wrong bio.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't,
that was hilarious. By the way,
thank you. For those of you who don't get the joke, for the audio version, there was a different. I'm sorry, for the video version, there's a different intro that we did. But if you're listening to us on the audio, you're not going to get it because it would not make sense. So I do want to touch base on one last thing.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the 9/11 thing. In the 5 days after, what's too soon? Is there a rule or?
I don't know that there's a time amount. I guess you just sort of feel it. Too soon has sort of become one of the terms that comics use as a joke now because it's just sort of maybe a little bit of okay. We obviously joke about you could joke about Pearl Harbor before you could joke about 9/11, let's say.
Right.
And maybe it's because people aren't alive anymore that we're actually in that, it's John Bonet, like Doug Stanhope doesn't believe there's any too soon. And I remember he would go out like the night after something happened and then make jokes about it. Joan Rivers, I had the pleasure of doing a whole week opening for Joan Rivers in Beverly Hills.
That's where I want to be.
And I remember a few times having people boo me because I made a joke. I don't remember what it was at the time. There was some line that I was doing that I was getting a groan. It was just sort of like whatever it was. I don't even remember. But I think it was about Hemingway shooting himself in the head or whatever, and it rhymed with something like that, And I got a lot of groans, and I talked to Joan Rivers after the show, and I just mentioned it was just like, wow, they don't like that one. And then she goes, well, I had a lady come up to me and complain to me about one of my jokes and say, well, I had cancer and you made a joke about cancer or whatever. And she was just like, well, my husband literally shot himself in the head, and I was up on stage in Vegas the next night and I was making jokes about it. Mm-hmm. You have your way of dealing with pain. I have mine. You can choose to come to the show or not. And she was incredible. And I think that's the way Doug looks at it. That's the way a lot of people look at it. By nature, I'm a little bit of a non-confrontational person. Sure. So in some ways, I'm not necessarily, but there's plenty of comics that are the same way. I always I'm always the victim in my situation, and to me, those are the ones that I usually like a lot. We were talking about Brian Regan, he represents the part of us that doesn't feel smart. It's like when he talks about reading a book, it's like, I'll read a whole paragraph and I'll have to go back to the beginning and read it again and then read it again.
That's me.
It's like, oh, I'm glad that somebody else is saying that kind of stuff. And, that to me, Gary Shandling was always one of my all-time favorites because he not only would he have these incredibly funny one-liners and jokes and stuff, but they were all shooting himself, and I love that because it made me feel better because I was like, well, I'm going to be on the dating scene soon, and I have a feeling it's going to go the way it's going for this guy, and I don't feel as bad now because it's charted territory, and I can make jokes about it,
I said that was I had one more question, but no, there were two other ones that wound up coming up. One of those is hecklers. How do you deal with hecklers?
Oh yeah, no, I was never very good at it. A couple of times I've done this thing where I get real quiet and I'll let their joke or whatever it is that they're yelling. Let's say they say you suck, which it was never usually necessarily that. It was something just a little different. But if it's somebody just saying you suck, like if you wait long enough and don't do anything, eventually people start kind of just laughing at that, just the situation. Okay, sir, thanks for chiming in. Okay, well, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Nobody's laughing. It's a bad show. I do suck. Just like whatever. But I was never a guy. It's like, yeah, your mom, whatever. Like I never had any of that kind of stuff. Now Doug Stanhope, I've seen him. I literally saw somebody start heckling and then have to get up literally crying, like because he spent so much time making fun of that person until they finally just got up and left. And it was just like, ooh, he took them down so hard. And you just don't want that person's never going to heckle another comedian again. And that nobody's ever on the heckler's side, it's just so I usually try to sort of ignore it if possible. Or just try to ask them, what did you mean by that? And then they usually just sort of like, just kind of stops, it's just like, just whatever, just go on, it's like, all right, well. And then the club usually throws them out if they're just being totally disruptive. Now, what I had one time was a guy predicting my jokes and saying them before I got to them, and that pissed me off a lot. And I got to my last joke of the whole night, the whole punchline, and the guy threw out what he thought was going to be the punchline, and it wasn't, but he just kind of ruined the timing of the whole thing, and I was just like, you suck, dude. And then I just like got off stage, but that really sucked. It was just like, boy, you just ruined that, huh? What are you still writing stand-up now, or?
Yes. Yeah. Because I have to go out there again. I'm going to Comedy Key West in March, and I'm going to Peoria, Illinois, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Burlington, Iowa, St. Louis, one show. I have to have new material. Like I've said this so many times in my life, but I have to have 25 minutes of new material, and I just have to push myself. It's a lot harder now than it used to be, because I used to have a peer group and we would all bounce stuff off on each other, and I just don't hang out as much as I used to in group settings. If I had a new song, I'd be at a party and I'd play it, like the party that you had here. It'd be real, hey, everybody, let's listen to this one song or whatever, and I'd be able to gauge,
right,
is this a funny one or not? So that's more challenging. But yeah, I'm writing stuff literally right now,
How much of your act is at this point music, and how much of it is stand-up?
I go on there usually about 15 minutes, and then I do about 25 minutes to 30 minutes of music. And when I say music, what I mean is I'm sitting there doing songs, but there's a lot of lines in between the songs too. But the first 15 minutes is basically just straight stand-up. And the reason I started doing that, and that was very difficult for me to put down the guitar and go up and just do stand-up, but I had to, because there were some people when I would go on after the first two comics, when I would go on and I had my guitar, there were some people that just tune out. They see a guitar and they're just like, I'm not into guitar stuff, and they've checked out of the show. Even if it's only maybe 15% of the audience, they start talking to their friends or whatever. They just feel like they're at a coffee house with a music guy playing. And so by going in with the stand-up, letting that transition be like, oh, this is just more of the same. We're just doing more comedy. And hey, does anybody want to hear some music? But now they know me and stuff like that. That started working much better.
Nice. Where can people find your work?
I tell them to go to YouTube. If you go to YouTube, you can not only see the full movie Punching the Clown from 2008 that kind of started a whole new world for me. Also, about 12 years ago, I started doing these kitchen videos from home, and a few of them have gone viral, and now they've become a major part of my comedy career. That's called Henry's Kitchen.
It's a brilliant, by the way. Phillips.
Thanks, man. And but yeah, if you go to Henlips or put in Henry Phillips into Google, but if you put Henlips into YouTube, you'll go to my channel. And yeah, just Google me. Just go in there and start from the beginning.
Are you on any of the socials?
Yeah. There's also henrys.kitchen. Just henrys.kitchen, no apostrophe. And that's got all the links. So that's got everything. TikTok, Twitch. Twice a week on Twitch, I do a live cooking lesson. So people can check that out. But again,
is there a Twitch handle for that? I don't know how Twitch works.
Henlips 1.
Right.
There was already a Henlips. So
of course there is.
But that's all on YouTube also. So if you just start there, you can eventually see it.
You know, interestingly enough, and I don't know if you know this, but for you guys, if you ever want to catch The Second Degree that Henry and I met on, you can catch that on imdb.com. If you look at, actually, if you go to my IMDb page or look at The Second Degree and look at the trailer, it should go right into the movie.
Nice.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I think we talked about that. Yeah.
It's a fun little flick. And we won't tell you what it's, well, actually, it is. It's about a bunch of losers that work at a car wash.
Pretty much.
And the highlight of their day is to go home and watch, or go home and play 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And Henry's character discovers that he's actually 6 degrees away from Kevin Bacon through people in his real life and goes out on a journey. So.
Yep, and you're still in touch with a lot of the gang, right?
I try to be. I think the only one is Scott, and that's it's like once a year, twice a year now. Oh, and Ryan Angel every once in a while.
Tell him I said hi.
Absolutely.
And you don't talk to Randall?
Nah. Every once in a while when we would do brunch, Randall would show up and surprise us, but I haven't seen Randall in probably a good 10 years.
Yeah, Randall I met through that guy Jory who set up my website, and then since then, sadly, Jory was in a motorcycle accident. He's no longer with us. So Randall and I kind of bonded over that. But that's the last time I've talked to him. I think that was like 10 years ago or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Way to bring the end down to it.
And with that, hire me for your birthday party. Yeah.
Henry, thanks for coming on to this episode of Playwright
man.
Spotlight.
Great to hang. Always good to hang with you.
Almost said Henry's Kitchen. Thanks for coming on.
Right.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.